I wanted to talk about a topic that has come up recently in some discussions I've had with people online, specifically relating to Bitcoin versus Forex trading. Although I really think that brings up a larger question of what is the role of Bitcoin, and is Bitcoin really a currency? Should it be classified as a currency? Sort of what's its purpose in the larger economy, and what can we think of Bitcoin as? I think this is a really important discussion because, myself included, I hold Bitcoin as a part of my personal portfolio. I have a percentage of my wealth invested into Bitcoin. So it's good to know what Bitcoin is actually protecting me against and why I'm holding it in my portfolio, because I think it's really easy to just justify saying, oh, I want to hold Bitcoin in my portfolio because it's going to go up in value eventually. It's a deflationary asset. It's really speculative. It's going to be growing over time. Eventually, we're going to have mass adoption. But I think that's all ignoring the real question, which is, when will Bitcoin actually experience mass adoption? And what can we actually think of Bitcoin as in our classification, in our portfolio? What do we actually think of Bitcoin as? So first, I wanted to start off similar to an answer that I've been giving to this whole question of Bitcoin versus Forex trading. And of course, this does relate to the question of, is Bitcoin a currency? But I wanted to make this distinction first. So as I've been talking a lot about on my channel, I have been getting into Forex trading quite a bit recently, and that's mainly because of the differences in Forex trading compared to any other market. And the biggest difference with Forex trading, why I love it so much, better than any other market, is because a majority of Forex volume is not actually speculative traders, but instead commercial entities. So whether it be governments, large corporations, for any reason, if someone needs to transact currency or hedge currency or move currency to a specific place for a specific reason, it all goes through Forex. So what ends up actually happening is a majority of volume in the Forex markets is from actual people using it, not for speculation, but for real world use cases. And this is a really interesting and cool situation because it's one of the only markets that I know of where you are able to take advantage and participate in a market with a larger use case outside of speculation. The thing about speculation, and this happens in cryptocurrency and in the stock market, is that the whole point of speculation is to try to increase market efficiency, right? Whenever people are trading against each other, whenever you're looking at the price of a stock, the whole idea is that the price of the stock right now, so if I'm looking at Bitcoin or I'm looking at Apple on the stock market, the whole idea is the price that I'm looking at is the most accurate price when considering all relevant information at that specific moment. And that's the efficient market hypothesis. Now, while I disagree with that, of course, the market's never going to be perfect. I do think that it definitely is more efficient than it was in the past in terms of pricing in information that we know at that specific moment. So, of course, the market is never going to be fully efficient, but it does get more efficient over time. And that's due to the fact that in the stock market, in cryptocurrency, the only people trading it, or a majority of people trading it, are people trading it specifically for speculatory reasons, which makes the market more efficient because it's all people trying to profit off of what someone else doesn't know. So Forex is really interesting because a majority of volume is not for speculation, so that gives more opportunities for more market inefficiencies in addition to more logical investing, so you can try to predict, which directions funds are going to be moving, whether it means that a certain country is going to be exporting more, how that affects the currency, etc. But the stock market is really more the idea of psychology and competing against other traders. So when people ask me the question of Bitcoin trading versus Forex trading or Forex trading versus stock market trading, I always like to give this comparison, which is Forex trading. In Forex trading, you're a small fish in a very large ocean. You're a very small part of a much larger market that does not have many competitors. It's as if you're trying to join a team. Let's say you're trying to join a sports team and you're playing baseball and there are 10 positions open, but only 5 people competing for those positions, right? You have a much higher chance of success and things are going to be a lot easier to do. There's just less competition overall. Now, compared to stock market trading, I would say stock market trading or cryptocurrency trading, since it's all based on speculation, is more similar to, let's say there's only one spot on the team, but 100 people fighting for that same spot. So yes, there's still a possibility of profit. Yes, you can still take advantage of market opportunities, but the chances of succeeding in that is going to be slimmer due to the fact that many other people are competing for that same amount of profit. So now that I made that distinction, I think it's important for anyone trading in the markets. Now I want to talk about sort of mass adoption for Bitcoin. I think there's this common misconception that once we see, government regulatory framework for Bitcoin, and once we see a Bitcoin ETF, that there's all of a sudden going to be mass adoption for Bitcoin. You're going to ask your neighbor and they're going to have Bitcoin. You're going to ask your local market, they're going to accept Bitcoin. I really do not think that is going to happen. In reality, what I think is going to happen is if there is any government regulation, if they do ever end up accepting an ETF, etc., it's not going to be for the purpose of mass adoption as an actual currency, but instead for mass adoption as a speculative asset. And this goes to my main point of this video. People need to realize that traditional fiat currency is just more practical, right? It's more practical for everyone purely on the basis that people need it in order to pay taxes. And that's the whole incentive of why, for example, in the US, we use US dollars, because if I don't have US dollars, I'm not going to be able to fulfill my obligation of paying taxes at the end of the year, or paying for whatever government services I am required to pay for. So a fiat currency is always going to be more practical than Bitcoin. So now that we've established that fiat currency is relatively superior to cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in our current situation, right now it's superior, what situations could we actually see mass adoption come to Bitcoin? What scenario would we see Bitcoin turn from a speculative asset into an asset with an actual larger use case? So when would we see a majority of volume not coming into the market for speculation, but instead to buy groceries or to go out and transact with someone? When would we actually see that scenario occur? So there are a couple situations where I see this happen. Number one, it's if there is a weak local currency. And we've already seen this in some developing nations such as Venezuela or any nation that has hyperinflation. But the thing that you need to understand is that even in scenarios in developing countries where they decide to use Bitcoin as opposed to their local currency, the amount of volume that that's going to bring to the market is not nearly enough to surpass the amount of speculatory trading volume that is already in that market. So the only situation where a weak local currency would truly turn Bitcoin into mass adoption is if the weak quote unquote local currency was truly on a global scale. So if we saw uncertainty for fiat currencies on a global scale, whether it be because of debt that a certain country is unable to repay, causing hyperinflation. If we saw hyperinflation on a global scale across some of the largest currencies, including the US dollar, which is currently the quote unquote reserve currency, then that could see a situation where there would be mass adoption of Bitcoin. There's also a use for Bitcoin in authoritarian countries. So for example, if the US tomorrow were to become communist or something, and the government said you're not allowed to spend money on buying unhealthy food, right? If you can't go to McDonald's because that's unhealthy food and you're going to get fat. Well, that's another use for Bitcoin, because I would, transfer my US dollars to Bitcoin, which the government can't control, and then I would purchase that McDonald's burger or whatever I decided to purchase because of that specific situation. But once again, I don't really think the entire world is going to turn into an authoritarian, majority of authoritarian countries just because of our current situation with the US really being the dominant leader in trying to promote democracy and having a majority of military control across the globe at the moment. Finally, the last use case that I have written down here are international transfers. And I think this is really an interesting one because it is certainly something that people can do right now. But international transfers, I think the main thing scaring away people from using Bitcoin to have mass international transfers is really just the instability of Bitcoin and the fact that if I want to send, let's say, $10 million to someone in Russia, and I happen to decide to use Bitcoin to do that, in just the time that the transaction takes to verify, the price of Bitcoin can move, a magnitude of percent, right? It's just not fast enough or efficient enough in a way where it could be used for international transfers at a scale that would allow it to see mass adoption outside of speculation. So those were the three main situations I could see where Bitcoin would have mass adoption. So next, I wanted to talk about this classification that many people have sort of said Bitcoin, what people have classified Bitcoin as. I think a lot of people have classified Bitcoin as like an alternative investment to gold, right? And I think this is a classification that is extremely incorrect. I do not think at all that Bitcoin is an alternative to gold, nor do I think that gold and Bitcoin are trying to achieve the same goal in your portfolio. I don't think they are the same thing at all. And we've seen that recently, of course, because the price of Bitcoin and the price of gold have been extremely different. Bitcoin hasn't really moved. In fact, it went down, whereas gold right now is about to make new all-time highs. And many people are questioning, well, why is this happening? It's a failure for Bitcoin. Shouldn't Bitcoin be the alternative to gold, the new gold, the better gold? No, I do not think that Bitcoin in any way has to do with the same use case as gold, because the thing about gold is still a commitment to institutions. Gold is still trust in the system. If you look at gold, a majority of gold is owned by paper gold, right? If I go on my local stock exchange and I decide to buy gold, I'm not buying physical gold, I'm buying paper gold. Because if I wanted to go to the bank tomorrow and withdraw that gold, the bank would have to go out, buy the gold, and then give it to me. So what ends up happening in that situation is that people actually own more gold than what is actually out there, right? I think there's some statistic, I can't remember exactly what it is, I'll put it on the screen, but there are like 3 owners for every bar of gold or something like that. So basically, I think gold is more a hedge on recessions and inflation, in that when there's a recession, governments now, as we're seeing time and time again, start printing money, they start to inject money into the economy, causing long-term higher inflation, which then in turn causes people to move to gold because they view gold as an asset that is much more scarce, that is much more valuable. And so as there is increased inflation, as there's any short-term recession, then people use gold as a hedge against that. And the difference in cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, this is very important, is that I don't think cryptocurrency and Bitcoin have any reason to see mass adoption during a recession. As I was mentioning earlier, one of the use cases was a weak local currency. What you need to understand is that during a recession, there's not really, in most scenarios, of course, there's not really any weakening of the local currency. If anything, there's deflation, which actually makes the local currency stronger. So in that situation, of course, people would most likely not move to Bitcoin as mass adoption. But in the situations where you would see this is if there was hyperinflation or really any reason to distrust the banking system for whatever reason to a point where it would destroy fiat currency. So for whatever reason, if fiat currency failed, that's the scenario where I would see Bitcoin really thriving and becoming a mass adoption because of the solution that it solves in that specific scenario. There's no reason for people to move to Bitcoin during a recession because number one, fiat currency is still perfectly fine, and gold is already a hedge that is in place for inflation, but you're still trusting banks because, of course, people don't think banks are going to fail. But if banks started to fail, if fiat currency became extremely weak, if people lost faith in fiat currency, then that's the situation where I would see Bitcoin really thriving. So outside of this scenario, I don't really see Bitcoin having any form of mass adoption. However, that being said, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? There's a reason why Bitcoin exists because it's a hedge against fiat currencies. There's a reason why gold exists because it's a hedge against inflation and recessions, etc. There's reasons for all these things existing, and they take up very important parts of the economy, and they're very important to hold in your portfolio in order to be safe against certain economic events that could happen in the future. So they're all valid assets, and I think that's why, for me personally, I classify Bitcoin as a commodity, because I think it's a commodity that has a different use case from gold, and that use case is just as important as gold, although I don't think that they're going to move in unison or move for the same reasons. And up until a scenario like I mentioned earlier, I think that it's just going to continue to become a speculatory asset, and there's really nothing wrong with that. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching this video. If you have any questions about what I talked about in this video, which I think you most likely will, make sure to leave those down below. I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible, and see you in the next one.